It is said that the Progressive Era was meant to solve the problems that plagued the country during the Gilded Age, that America was turning a corner towards a more positive future without an abundance of social and economic inequality. Progressive ideology promoted a better world for the majority and positive future for humanity. However, this constant striving for perfection would have a negative and irreversible impact on immigrant populations. Eugenics, perhaps the most notorious pseudoscience, would become one of the most fatal progressive attempts to improve economy, with consequences lasting well into the 21st century. The acceptance of eugenics as a science proved that progressive reform was not entirely positive and not created equal. In the late 1800s, the United States ended their long-standing devotion to welcoming immigrants into what was referred to as the New World. This change in immigration policy followed an influx of immigrants from Asia and other areas that brought in unwelcomed laborers. The United States government began a streak of immigration bans with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, went on to create the Immigration Act of 1917 to exclude immigrants from Southern and Eastern European countries, and later the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act of 1924, which focused on limiting the amount of Catholics, Jews, and Orthodox Christians that entered the country. These border restrictions took place alongside financial crises in the 1870s and 1890s. Depressions were triggered by the industrial advancements of the Gilded Age, introducing a major distinction between the rural wealthy classes and urban poor classes. Progressives, maintaining their goal of bettering the country, found that new immigration laws would work to solve the problems that came alongside America's economic growth. These drastic restrictions, based on ethnicity, religion, and even ability and disability of individuals who wish to work and live in the United States, required justification by the government and other powerful organizations. They were compelled to explain why this was such a positive thing for the American public. It was believed that an increase of immigrants meant a decrease in job opportunities for the American people. This was a widely accepted belief, but as more and more progressives became brainwashed by eugenics, the idea that immigrant workers were unfit for American jobs became the primary defense. The eugenics mindset was first introduced in the 19th century by Sir Francis Galton, who promoted racial improvement by scientific means. His beliefs were inspired by the famous pea plant studies performed by Gregor Mendel. Francis Galton believed that the genetic traits and inheritance patterns of pea plants could be applied to the human race in order to breed desirable traits and completely eradicate undesirable traits. To Galton and other eugenicists at the time, heredity was the only factor in topics such as feeble-mindedness, idiocy, and other so-called degenerate traits. Important factors such as environment and circumstance were completely ignored, making crime, prostitution, alcoholism, and language deficiencies strictly genetic problems. Early 19th century progressives who promoted immigrant restrictions found eugenics to be an effective reasoning behind their border limitations. By advertising that concepts such as intelligence, character, and temperament were purely based on heredity, progressive reformers could defend their immigration restrictions and block immigrants who have already arrived from available jobs. Populations from Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, Greece, Italy, Montenegro, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Russia, Serbia, Spain, and Turkey were among those identified and turned away. Every immigrant entering the country through main ports such as Ellis Island were subject to an extensive search and examination. There was often an inability to communicate where someone was from due to language barriers, thus many immigrants were barred from entering due to stereotypical physical features alone. Those that were recognized as racially unfit were either sent back to their home countries or accepted by the state into institutions and mental hospitals, depending on how threatening the eugenicists found them to be. Keeping undesirable races away from the general American population not only was a means of protecting the country from expanding undesirable populations, but also kept these people away from the nation's job market. The stereotypes that the eugenics movement introduced during the Progressive Era were maintained and even strengthened during the First, Second, and Cold Wars. While Progressive Era eugenic beliefs had been based on concepts like job limitations and nativist values, wartime eugenics embraced the increase of threats from Eastern countries to discriminate against other ethnicities. Further pushback from civil rights movements led white supremacist organizations to turn to eugenics at a local level during the 50s and 60s. And the idea that criminals could pass on degenerate genes created a movement of forced prison sterilizations in modern times. While early progressives sought out eugenic ideas as a means to improve America's urban, industrialized areas and solve widespread economic issues, the movement proved to be detrimental. Stereotypes surrounding immigrant and poor populations remained stable far past the Progressive Era of reform, greatly impacting minority populations for generations to come.